On a little bit of a roll today, but there's a lot to talk about. Now, before I get into this one, just a very quick proposition, and this is for any Trump voters out there who still believe that the 2020 election was stolen by Joe Biden. And the proposition is this: if the whole system is rigged against Trump, as you obviously believe, I mean, if you believe that the 2020 election was stolen, then it follows that you believe the system is rigged. How do you explain his win this year? So Donald Trump has won the Electoral College and the popular vote in 2024, and he lost both in 2020. If the whole system is rigged, or it was rigged in 2020, then you're going to have to conclude that it's all been cleaned up in 2024. Or that it's only rigged when Trump loses, and it's okay when he wins. There's obviously a fundamental paradox here. Either it's rigged or it isn't. And this is one of the big problems I have with the thinking of a lot of enthusiastic Trump voters. It's just this inability to just admit that he lost in 2020. You know, I haven't seen many Democrats or people on the left trying to say that Trump stole this election in 2024. They've been depressed about it, they've been angry about it, they've been upset about it, but I honestly haven't seen any Democrats, they might be out there, but I haven't seen anyone saying that Trump stole this election. And of course Harris conceded, Biden has invited Trump to the White House, etc. They've offered a peaceful transfer of power. Now, whatever you think of the Democrats' ideology or politics or policies, I'm sure there's plenty of ground for criticism. That is a fundamental difference. And this is why I am so anti-Trump. Because I think he's fundamentally undemocratic. This year he happens to have won. But I guarantee, I mean, it's a confident thing to say, but I am absolutely certain that had Harris won this election, she obviously hasn't, but had she won the election, Trump would have kicked up a stink about it. Absolutely. And even if he had been less dogged than he was in 2020, you could be damn sure some of his supporters would have kicked up a stink about it. So, no, I do not respect the 47th president. I think he's a contemptible figure. He's a very successful figure on one hand. He will be the 47th president, but I can never respect Donald Trump. I just think that in terms of, I suppose you could argue that, you know, he's faced 2 assassination attempts, he's been vilified, he's had all of this. So I suppose in that sense he is tough. Right, I'll concede that. But as a character, I just think I think Donald Trump is morally bankrupt. I really do. And that doesn't make me a far leftist or woke or a fanatical Harris supporter or something. It's just common sense based on this man's character, based on his record. That's it. But you know, I'm open-minded enough to consider a lot of different things here. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at again where the Harris campaign may have failed. I think that, you know, there was a lot spoken about the abortion issue in Roe versus Wade, and I don't think the Democrats were wrong to make that an issue because it is a major issue for many American women. Goodness knows what Trump's going to do with that. He says he's going to put it back to the states, but frankly, some red states have very extreme views on this. Now, do I think it will actually go to the extreme levels that is feared? I'm not sure. And I actually don't think Trump, for all his other faults, I don't think he's a religious fanatic. I really don't. In fact, I saw a video from 1999 where Trump said he was disgusted by the idea of abortion, but he was nevertheless pro-choice. So he was open-minded enough at that time to say he supported choice, although his personal feelings were against abortion. But I don't think it was for a religious basis. I don't think Donald Trump is pious in any way, shape or form. I think he just likes to pitch to the religious right. But Yeah, if we look at some of the things around the Harris campaign, there was a big focus on women's rights. That's fine, it's valid. But when she spoke about men, it was always about and the millions of men who support their sisters and the women in their lives. It's an assumption that I mean, on one hand, it's sort of not being overtly feminist, it's sort of bringing men into the fold and saying, and the men, but I do think the Harris campaign underestimated men's issues. This is something that is nowhere near spoken about enough in the Western world, the United States, Canada, Britain. It's just not, it's still massively overlooked. We have had more focus on issues like mental health and male suicide, but for example, in the United States, um, the majority of murder victims are men. And yes, the majority of murderers are men, but that's the reality. Probably the majority of suicides, if it's anything like the UK, will be men. Substance abuse issues, etc., etc. Probably workplace accidents. Men will disproportionately occupy more dangerous jobs than women. So those sort of issues. I'm not saying the Harris campaign should have made it, front and center, but there has been a gender disparity in the votes. If we look at black men, for example, now I know in my previous video I said I don't like identity politics, and I think media pundits are wrong to focus on that. However, you could see some trajectories, and why is it more black men voted for Trump than Harris? It may well be that young black men, like young white men, like young men in general, feel that Trump is a candidate who doesn't vilify them. I mean, I'm not sure that's accurate, but why is it? Why is it they went to him in those sort of proportions? We've heard a lot about the Manosphere. So, I'll be honest, I don't know Joe Rogan that well. I'm loosely familiar with him, but we hear a lot about the Manosphere, these sort of alpha male type pundits who um, get a lot of attention from young American men and, and around the world, and they tend to be pro Trump. Dana White is another, the UFC president, or CEO. I'm not sure what his exact position is. Founder, I guess. Yeah, I don't follow UFC the way I follow boxing. But anyway, you don't really have that in the Harris campaign. There was one interesting thing they done. The wrestler Dave Batista, he's definitely a man's man. He's a tough guy. He's a great wrestler. He's like Dwayne Johnson, he's went into the acting world. He made a video specifically talking about Donald Trump being a better male and, not being a tough guy and so on. Obviously, that didn't deliver. But I think that was the Harris campaign trying to address this point about masculinity. But, one ad isn't enough. I think young American men, for the most part, would have went to Trump. So the Democrats need to address that. It could well be that their constant focus and obsession with, critical race theory and feminism alienates young white men. That's maybe something to consider. Maybe they need to consider that constantly, frankly, shaming young white men with this woke orthodoxy, and I don't think Kamala Harris herself has done that necessarily, but the progressive wing of the Democrats absolutely have. I think critical race theory in America in 2024 is a fundamentally divisive thing. Telling white children that they're fundamentally oppressors and black children that they're perpetual victims clearly isn't healthy for anyone. Um, I also think, and I think I mentioned this in a previous video, there is a serious problem in America with double standards on race. Where you get minority victims of racism, it is called out and condemned, as it should be. But when white people are the victims, it absolutely gets ignored. New York City has a very serious problem with this. I saw a video about an hour ago, guess it was from about 2 years ago, but this sort of thing's happening a lot in New York City these days. An elderly white man, 78 years old, was beaten to a pulp, hospitalized by a young black couple because he asked them to turn their music down on the New York City subway. They beat him to a pulp. Now, you can imagine if a young white couple beat up an elderly black person. There would be angry street protests. You know, you'd be hearing an endless media punditry about white supremacy, etc. So I do think left-wing media is extremely dishonest in this regard. You know, this cowardly political correctness of not calling it out. They might report the specific crime. I mean, they might report that the attack happened, but they will just ignore the racial component unless the perpetrator is white. Now, I don't like this sort of identity politics. I really would veer away from it. But in a way, the progressive left, the so-called progressive left, push people into a corner of having to point this stuff out because it's hypocrisy. It's sheer hypocrisy. I mean, the fact that someone like George Floyd could be turned into a folk hero. This is a man who had a violent criminal record. I still think that Chauvin went too far. I think it's right that Chauvin went to prison. Floyd repeatedly said he couldn't breathe. I don't care that he had, a history of substance abuse. He repeatedly said he couldn't breathe. That's, a no-brainer. But that doesn't mean that he was a good person. It doesn't mean that he should be someone who should be idolized. My basic attitude to that is Chauvin went too far. It's right that he was punished, and the police should be accountable when they cross a line. Police officers shouldn't be above the law. But I did find it in frankly bad taste to see someone like George Floyd held up as a sort of civil rights icon. This was a guy who was a career criminal. He was not a good person. Um, and likewise in Britain, with Chris Kaba, again, violent criminal who died violently. These are not people who should be celebrated. When the police cross a line, they should be held to account. That's about the only thing I agree with Black Lives Matter on. The police should be held to account. But I think the Black Lives Matter is a fundamentally racist movement. I mean, the dogma is racist. The idea of focusing only on one group's lives mattering. What about Asian lives? What about white lives? What about Hispanic lives? The message all lives matter is the exact opposite of racism. It's literally the least racist thing you could say. Yet what did we hear? Oh, it's white supremacists say that. So I do think that, I don't think you could just say the events of 2020 now turned in favour of Trump, because remember, those riots were in summer 2020 and Biden won in November, so I don't think we could explain what's happened due to that. But I do think that America, sadly, is a deeply, deeply divided country. I maintain everything I've said about Donald Trump. I think the man is toxic, but the Democrats cannot claim that they're absolutely moderate. They cannot say that their record has been totally unifying. It clearly hasn't. I think that things like critical race theory are also toxic. I think they're just as toxic as Trump. And, I'm proud of the fact that I've been consistent on this. I've called out Trump and extreme MAGA people, but I've also called out extreme wokery. And honestly, I'd like American moderates to be a bit more bold and speak out a lot more. That is, people who will call out the far right and the far left. I'm not going to propose that they're exactly equal measure. I'd say right now, America's clearly lurched to the right, but the far left do themselves no favours, and sometimes Harris has pandered to this. When she went along with defunding the police, this is coming from a woman who was a prosecutor. She should have known better than to say that. That was a very foolish position for her to take. But she is a politician. Find me one politician who hasn't been opportunistic at some point. Most have, including absolutely Donald Trump. But yeah, I just wonder with this gender thing, a lot of young men went for Trump, so maybe they do feel like they've been condescended and talked down to and vilified. The Democrats need to recognize that. If the Democrats really, really want to get back into power, they need to be a party that's more than identity politics. They need to be more than just a party for feminists and Black Lives Matter. Frankly, they need to appeal to working class white men as well. Harris picked Tim Walz, Midwest white governor. That was not a bad move. And actually, they won Minnesota, so which is his home state. But I mean, I think had she had a woman vice president or a minority vice president as a running mate, she probably would have lost even more so. But I don't know. There's a lot of nuances in American politics, but I say again, people have absolutely the right have a right to be concerned about Trump. They should respect the result, but they have a right to be concerned about him. And I've seen all these kind of Proud Boy type little memes coming out, and MAGA memes, just mocking Democrats and mocking Harris supporters. I think a lot of the editing is a bit sloppy. It tends to be like portraying Trump as like a superhero, and it's just very sloppy editing. Um, I would suggest to those people don't gloat too much, because you might find that Donald Trump lets you down. You might find some of the things he's proposing he won't be able to deliver. So, I'm not talking about the Democrats here, I'm talking about the things that you want. You might find Trump won't actually deliver them. So, I wouldn't be too smug. Also, it contradicts the message of reaching out. I mean, they can celebrate that their guy has won, but shouldn't they be, you know, gracious in victory? Is that a concept, or is it just preferable to be, mock the losing side? Like the expression kicking someone when they're down, so to speak. Um, yeah, so that's my take on that angle of it. I'm sure there's a lot more to say, but I'll wrap this up for now.